All right, listener, today we're diving deep into a question that has, well, puzzled philosophers for centuries. Do children have rights? We're going to be dissecting excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And trust me, this is going to stretch those philosophical muscles.
It is a question with huge implications. As a philosopher, you'll appreciate how these different theories of rights completely reshape how we view the moral status of children.
Okay, so let's start, I guess, by just defining our terms. I mean, before we can even ask if children have rights, we need to figure out what makes someone a child to begin with. So how do philosophers approach that?
Well, it's trickier than you might think. Philosophically, childhood isn't a fixed category, like, say, human. It's more of a developmental stage marked by constant change, and growth. And this makes it really difficult to define universally.
So a child like in ancient Rome might be considered an adult by today's standards.
Exactly. Different cultures and historical periods have had radically different ideas about what constitutes childhood. I mean, what might be childish behavior in one context could be seen as totally mature in another.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then there's this whole issue of capacity, which seems to keep popping up in these discussions. It seems pretty central to the whole rights debate. So what exactly do philosophers mean by capacity when they're talking about rights?
So capacity in this context, it really means the ability to, well, understand and exercise those rights. It's not just enough to express a preference. You need to grasp the implications of your choices,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about rights.
So a toddler, saying, I want candy, that's not exactly exercising a right to confectionery.
Not quite. No, it's more expressing a desire. But they might not fully grasp the nutritional consequences or understand that their right to candy might be, limited by their parents' rules or something. The key thing to remember about capacity is that it develops gradually.
Yeah.
As children mature, their understanding of choice and consequence kind of deepens.
Okay, so we've tackled childhood and capacity. Now let's get to the heart of the matter, the clashing theories of rights. We've got will theory versus interest theory, and it sounds like a real philosophical showdown.
It is a showdown. Yeah. Will theory, to put it simply, sees rights as protected choices.
Mhm.
It emphasizes the individual's power to claim or waive duties. Think of it as having control over your own sphere of influence, and being able to enforce decisions about things you have a right to.
So it's all about an individual's ability to stand up and say, this is my right and I choose to exercise it.
Yeah, that's the essence of it. It's a very individualistic approach. And this raises a pretty big problem when we're talking about children, right? Who might not yet have that full power of choice.
So does that mean will theory just completely excludes children from having rights? I mean, that seems kind of harsh, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the major criticisms of will theory. Its potential to exclude anyone who lacks the full capacity to exercise their will. If you can't make a conscious, informed choice, will theory kind of leaves you in a tough spot. And it's a big reason why a lot of philosophers find it inadequate when applied to children.
Okay, so will theory puts a lot of emphasis on, that individual choice. What about interest theory? How does that approach the whole concept of rights?
Well, interest theory kind of shifts the focus from choice to needs. It says that rights are really all about protecting an individual's sufficiently important interests, whether or not they can, actively claim or waive those rights.
So even if a child can't, articulate their rights, this theory says their interests still matter, and, society has a duty to protect those interests.
Exactly. It flips the script on will theory, by basically saying, look, even if someone can't stand up and demand their rights, their needs and interests still deserve protection.
So it's more about a collective responsibility to safeguard well-being, regardless of an individual's capacity to exercise their will. And this is where the whole debate about children's rights gets really, interesting. Because even if we accept that interest theory covers children, some philosophers still argue against granting them, full rights.
Absolutely. And their arguments often kind of revolve around this very question of capacity. They say children just lack the cognitive and emotional maturity to fully understand and exercise complex rights, especially, ones that involve major life decisions.
So it's kind of like the you can't drive until you're 16 argument, but for rights.
Mm-hmm.
We're shielding them from choices they might not fully grasp.
That's one way to put it, yeah. They argue that allowing children too much freedom could actually end up harming them. you know? Like, think about things like voting or signing contracts or making medical decisions. These require a certain level of, like, reasoning and understanding that, takes time to develop.
Yeah, but isn't there like a danger in that line of thinking? I mean,
Mm.
if we just keep focusing on what children can't do, don't we risk like, I don't know, underestimating their potential and maybe even hindering, their development?
Yeah, that's a key argument made by the liberationists, the folks who really champion children's rights. They basically reject the idea that children lack, capacity, arguing that denying them rights actually prevents them from developing, that very capacity.
So it's like saying you can't learn to swim without, getting in the water. Like by not giving children the chance to actually exercise their rights, we're kind of stopping them from gaining the experience and the understanding they need to like become responsible rights holders.
Exactly. Yeah, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're deemed incapable, so they're denied opportunities, which then reinforces the idea that they're incapable.
Right, that makes sense. But even among like those who support children's rights, there seem to be different, I guess, levels of commitment,
Yeah.
right? It's not just this simple all rights or no rights situation.
Absolutely. We can distinguish between real and rhetorical liberationists. Real liberationists, they genuinely believe that children should have all the same rights as adults, without exception. Rhetorical liberationists, on the other hand, they might use the language of rights as a strategic tool to advocate for better treatment of children, even if they don't necessarily believe in complete like equality in
So
every single instance.
so sometimes it's about starting with like a really strong, uncompromising demand,
Yeah.
to get people's attention and kind of push for change, even if the ultimate goal is like more nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. It's about leveraging, the power of rights discourse to, um, highlight the injustices children face and advocate for, some real tangible improvements in their lives.
Right. And one of their key points is that using age as the main like criteria for deciding who gets rights is kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
Yeah, often unfair. It's like saying everyone born in January gets certain privileges, regardless of their actual abilities.
Yeah, the argument for marginal cases, as it's known, really, it really drives that point home. Think about it. You could have like a really mature and responsible 15-year-old who, demonstrates a deeper understanding of certain issues than, say, a 30-year-old who makes consistently impulsive or, harmful choices. Does age in those cases really tell us who's more capable of exercising certain rights?
Okay, yeah, that's a really compelling example. It definitely challenges like the whole idea that age is some kind of reliable indicator of, of capacity. Okay, so if we ditch age as like the benchmark, how do we decide who gets which rights? Do we have like individual competency tests for every single right? That sounds like a total logistical nightmare.
Well, yeah, you're right. There are definitely practical challenges to, to consider. Administering individual tests for every single right, for every child would be incredibly like difficult and resource intensive. And then there's a whole question of bias, right? I mean, how do you design a test that's truly fair and objective, especially when you're dealing with something as complex as like human development?
So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right?
Yeah.
Age is a blunt instrument, but it's at least clear and consistent. Individual assessments, I mean, they might be more accurate in theory, but they're just a mess in practice. So like, where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And, philosophers they're still wrestling with it. Some argue that, the potential harm of wrongly denying someone their rights outweighs, those practical challenges of trying to find a better system. They advocate for a more nuanced approach, right? One that considers both age and individual circumstances, recognizing that, a one-size-fits-all solution just isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. It's about finding like a balance, right? Acknowledging that while age can be a good starting point, it shouldn't be the only factor. Especially, when we're talking about rights that involve potentially life-altering decisions. But okay, let's say, for argument's sake, that we accept that children should have rights. Does that mean they get all the same rights as, as
Yeah.
adults? Or is there some kind of like special menu for kids?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Philosopher Joel Feinberg, he proposed this helpful framework for thinking about this. He categorized rights into three groups: A rights for adult only, AC rights common to adults and children, and then C rights specifically for children only.
Okay, so it's not this like, all or nothing situation. There's
Yeah.
like a spectrum of rights, with some specifically for adults, some, shared by everyone, and then some just for kids. Can you give us like some examples?
Sure. So, a classic example of an A right would be the right to vote. It's generally reserved for adults who are deemed capable of, understanding the political process and making informed choices about who governs them. An AC right, that would be something like the right to health care. Everyone, regardless of age, deserves access to medical care.
Right, that makes sense. Voting requires like, a certain level of civic engagement and understanding, while healthcare is just this fundamental need for all humans. Okay, what about C rights? What kind of rights are like specific to children just because they're, children?
Well, C rights, they aim to address like the unique needs and vulnerabilities of childhood. A good example would be the right to be protected from harm. Children are especially susceptible to various forms of abuse and neglect, right? So they need these like special legal and social safeguards to ensure their safety and well-being.
So it's about recognizing that children aren't just like miniature adults. Yeah, they have different developmental needs and require different levels of protection and care. Are there other examples of C rights? What about like, the right to play?
Oh, absolutely. Feinberg and other philosophers have argued that children have specific rights related to their development and well-being. Things like the right to play, the right to education, even the right to be loved. These rights acknowledge that childhood isn't just this like waiting room for adulthood. It's a valuable and distinct stage of life with its own set of needs and entitlements.
The right to be loved.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful one. It speaks to like the huge importance of nurturing relationships for a child's healthy development.
Yeah.
And it really kind of reinforces the idea that, children have rights not just because they'll one day be adults, but because they deserve care and respect in their own right now.
Exactly. Recognizing and protecting children's rights is about ensuring their present well-being just as much as their, future flourishing. It's about creating a world where they can thrive, as children and develop into capable, responsible adults.
This is all also insightful. We've covered a lot of ground from, defining childhood to unpacking these different theories of rights and the arguments for and against, children having them. But there's one concept that really stands out to me, this idea of the right to an open future. Can you explain exactly what that means and why it's so crucial when we're, talking about children's rights?
The uh, the right to an open future is, well, it's fascinating, and it's potentially one of the most impactful concepts when we think about children's rights. It's essentially about safeguarding a child's their future autonomy and well-being as they transition into adulthood. Imagine it as protecting their ability to make meaningful choices about their lives, without being unduly constrained by decisions that were made for them, during childhood.
So it's like saying, don't box them in. Let them explore different paths and discover who they truly are without being like forced into a predetermined mold.
Yeah, exactly. Feinberg, who we discussed earlier, called these anticipatory autonomy rights. Rights that are held in trust for the child's future self.
That phrase, rights and trust, it's so powerful. But how open does the future need to be? I mean, does a child need the potential to be, like a brain surgeon and a concert pianist and a professional athlete? Like, how many options is enough?
Well, that's a point of contention. Some philosophers argue for a maximizing interpretation, where the goal is to provide as many options as possible. Really open up this world of possibilities. Others, like Arneson and Shapiro, they kind of push back against this, arguing that maximizing options can be, impractical and even counterproductive.
So it's not about overwhelming a child with like every imaginable path, but rather ensuring that they have, a range of fulfilling and valuable choices, like quality over quantity when it comes to
Yeah.
options.
Exactly. Yeah. Forcing a child to pursue every conceivable path could actually end up hindering their development. It might prevent them um, from discovering and nurturing their genuine, passions and talents. It's about striking a balance,
Hmm.
ensuring a reasonable array of choices without creating this overwhelming buffet of options.
finding that that sweet spot between providing opportunities and avoiding unnecessary restrictions.
Yeah.
Yeah, this makes me think about how parents raise their kids
Hmm.
and pass on their values. Is it even possible to to instill your beliefs without in some ways closing off certain future choices for your child?
Yeah, that's a real tension, and one that many philosophers grapple with. How do you transmit cultural or religious values without without infringing on a child's right to an open future? It's a delicate balancing act for sure.
Right. I mean, teaching your kid to be kind and honest seems different from pushing them towards a specific career path or belief system.
Yeah.
So where do we draw that line
Hmm.
between guidance and freedom?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some philosophers, they argue it's impossible to teach these core values like justice and fairness without embedding them within a broader doctrine or worldview.
So even in a society that values individual freedom, there's this inherent tension between promoting autonomy and passing on values that are considered essential.
Exactly. Philosopher Clayton, for example, he argues that parents shouldn't enroll their children into comprehensive doctrines. He draws this parallel between political power and parental authority, arguing that both should be exercised in a way that respects individual freedom of choice.
That's a pretty radical stance, especially for parents with deeply held religious or cultural beliefs. Isn't there a risk in raising kids in this moral vacuum? I mean, don't children need guidance and values to navigate the world?
Well, yeah, there are definitely counter arguments. Some philosophers say that the analogy between political and parental power is flawed. They argue that parents have a right, even a responsibility to raise their children according to their own values.
That's like saying that shielding children from all moral or cultural influence is neither realistic nor desirable. I mean, they need some kind of framework to make sense of the world, and parents are often in the best position to provide that.
Right, exactly. And it's important to remember that children aren't just, these passive recipients of their parents' values. They're active agents,
Mm.
who can question and reject and, ultimately form their own beliefs and values as they mature.
So it's not about indoctrinating them, but rather engaging in this ongoing dialogue, allowing them to you know grapple with different ideas and ultimately make their own choices. But what happens when children aren't yet you know able to make those choices for themselves? If they can't always exercise their own autonomy, is it at least crucial for them to be heard?
Oh, absolutely. Even if, children can't always make the final decisions about things that affect them, having their voices heard is incredibly important. Article 12 of the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, specifically addresses this, granting children the right to express their views freely in all matters affecting them.
Yeah. Being ignored or dismissed, especially when it directly impacts your life, I mean, that can be really frustrating at any age. Sends the message that your opinions just don't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Giving children a voice isn't just about, being polite or making them feel good. It's about recognizing their inherent, dignity and respecting their emerging autonomy. Their views, might not always be decisive, but they should at least be given, due weight and consideration.
So it's about moving beyond that, purely paternalistic model
Hmm.
where adults just make all the decisions,
Yeah.
and shifting towards a more collaborative approach
Yeah.
where children are, active participants in shaping their own lives. This brings to mind the landmark Gillick case. Wasn't that like a turning point in legally recognizing a child's right to be heard?
It was, yeah. The Gillick case, which centered around whether or not doctors could, provide contraceptive advice to minors without parental consent. It really kind of shifted the conversation about, children's evolving capacity for decision making. Lord Scarman's statement in that case that, parental rights yield to a child's right to make their own decisions when they reach, sufficient understanding. That was huge. That was a real game changer.
Oh, so it's not just about age anymore, but about assessing a child's competence to make specific decisions. But how do we determine that competence? What does it actually mean for a kid to be Gillick competent?
Well, that's a vital question, and it's led to, a lot of debate. Gillick competence, it involves, several factors:
Yeah.
understanding the nature of, of an act, appreciating, its consequences, and being able to weigh different options and make a reasoned choice.
So it's not just about, being intelligent. It's about having a mature grasp of the situation and what's really at stake. But is this bar like set too high for kids? I mean, if adults make questionable decisions all the time, why should children have to be, perfect decision makers to have a say in their own lives?
That's a valid criticism, and one that's often raised. Critics argue that it creates a double standard,
Right.
demanding a level of rationality and understanding from children that many adults, just don't consistently exhibit.
It seems like we're asking kids to clear this like hurdle that a lot of adults wouldn't even attempt. But
Yeah.
then again, if we lower the bar too much, aren't we risking, putting kids in situations where they might, make harmful choices?
hmm That's the dilemma, isn't it? Balancing a child's right to autonomy with their need for protection. It's a constant challenge, and there are no easy answers. It requires careful consideration, open dialogue, and a willingness to reevaluate our assumptions as our understanding of child development evolves.
Yeah, this whole Gillick competence thing,
Yeah.
it really kind of highlights that, that tension between protecting children and respecting their autonomy. It's like walking a tightrope,
Right.
right? Too much protection and you risk like infantilizing them,
Yeah.
but too much freedom and you could be exposing them to harm. So how do we like navigate this tricky terrain? How do we find that balance between respecting a child's, right to make their own choices and our responsibility to keep them safe?
It's a question that demands like constant reflection and an open dialogue, really. There's no like magic formula, no one size fits all answer. But I think a crucial starting point is fostering open and honest, communication. We need to like create spaces where children, you know, they feel safe
Okay.
to express their views, even
Is
if those views are different from our own.
It's about like moving away from that top-down approach
Yeah.
where adults just dictate, the terms
hmm
and shifting towards a more collaborative model where children are like, active participants
Yeah.
in decisions that affect their lives.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing them as individuals,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
with valuable perspectives, not just as like passive recipients of adult wisdom.
Exactly. And that means being willing to really listen
Yeah.
to what children have to say, not just like, hearing their words, but trying to understand their reasoning, their perspective, their values, even if we ultimately disagree with their choices, acknowledging their right to be heard. I mean, that's paramount.
It's about respecting their emerging autonomy, even as we recognize their need for guidance and support.
Yeah.
And that balance, I imagine, it shifts constantly
Huh.
as children grow and mature.
Right.
What might be, an appropriate level of control for a 5-year-old
hmm
would feel completely, stifling to a 15-year-old.
Absolutely. Context matters. That the key is to remain flexible, adaptable, recognizing that children are, they're constantly evolving, and their needs and capacities are always changing.
So it's not about like finding a fixed solution, but rather, engaging in this ongoing process of reevaluation,
Yeah.
adjustment. It's
Yeah.
about being responsive
Yeah.
to the individual child and,
Mhm.
and recognizing that their, journey towards autonomy is a gradual one. This whole conversation about children's rights has been incredibly illuminating. And I think for anyone listening who's also a parent, it raises a lot of, questions about how we approach raising, our own children.
It certainly does. Yeah. It challenges us to rethink, our assumptions, and to consider how our actions, even those undertaken with the best of intentions, right, might impact a child's, developing sense of self
Yeah.
and their right to shape their own future.
It's a call to be more, more mindful,
Mm.
more intentional in our parenting, to see our children not just as extensions of ourselves, but
Mhm.
as individuals
Yeah.
with their own unique, paths to forge.
Exactly. And to remember that respecting a child's rights isn't about, giving them free rein to do whatever they want. It's about, uh, It's about creating a space where they feel, seen, heard,
Hmm.
valued,
Hmm.
where they can develop their own sense of, agency while still feeling, safe and supported.
It's about striking that delicate balance,
Yeah.
yeah, between guidance and freedom, recognizing that the ultimate goal is to equip children with the skills and the confidence they need
Yeah.
to navigate the world as as autonomous, responsible individuals.
Well said. Yeah. And as we navigate this, this complex terrain, it's important to remember that we're not alone.
Right.
There are countless resources, organizations, individuals who are dedicated to advancing children's rights and well-being
Yeah.
by engaging with these resources, by continuing to learn and grow in our understanding. We can create a world that truly honors the rights and the dignity of all children.
This deep dive has been a real journey of discovery for me, and I hope it's been the same for you, listener. It's clear that this question of children's rights it's multifaceted
Hmm.
and ever evolving, but but by engaging with these philosophical perspectives, by challenging our assumptions and remaining open to new ideas, we can move towards a future where children's voices are heard, their needs are met, and their rights are fully respected.
Beautifully put. Yeah, it's a future worth striving for.
Thanks for joining us on this provoking deep dive, listener. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.